Some knocks don't come from hands, they come from the wind. Soft, measured, like a memory too patient to be forgotten. It was the winter of 1889, the kind that arrived early and stayed too long. The hills around Camp Verde had turned to bone, and the snow blanketed the ground like a silence too thick to shovel. I was living alone then in a cabin built for two but occupied by one. My husband had died 4 winters before taken by a mine collapse, so sudden it left the stove burning and supper untouched. Our baby didn't make it past her first breath. And me, I stayed. I didn't grieve loudly, didn't curse God, I just stayed. There's a kind of stillness that comes after too much loss. It doesn't scream. It hums low in the corners of rooms like wind through a cracked window frame. That evening, the wind howled in a way I'd never heard before. Not angry, not sad, but searching. And then, 3 knocks. Not frantic, not fearful, just certain. When I opened the door, he was standing there. A boy, maybe 10, barefoot, wrapped in a threadbare coat, burlap tied around his feet like worn-out promises. He didn't speak, didn't beg, didn't cry. He just looked at me, eyes the color of dusk over dry land, and I felt something shift. Not pity, not dread. Recognition. As if the wind had delivered something I wasn't brave enough to ask for. As if this boy, silent and trembling on my porch, wasn't lost at all, but meant to find me. He didn't speak the next day, not a single word. When morning came, he was already outside hauling water from the pump, like he'd lived here for years. The sleeves of his too big coat were rolled up to his elbows, revealing skinny arms pale and red from the cold. I stood at the window watching him through the frost-blurred glass, the kettle forgotten on the stove. The boy's hands gripped the iron handle with a kind of practiced quiet. No fumbling, no hesitation, just a steady rhythm, as if the work itself was the only thing left keeping him upright. He didn't look at the house, didn't glance up to see if I was watching, but I watched, more than I meant to. When I stepped outside with a mug of warm broth, he paused long enough to take it from my hands. His fingers brushed mine cold as stone, but steady. He nodded once, that was all. Then he turned and went back to the pump. No thank you, no questions, no voice. And yet, I found myself speaking to him anyway. That afternoon, I told him where to find the feed for the chickens. I pointed to the smokehouse and said he was welcome to use the shed if the barn felt too cold. He didn't answer, but the next morning the feed bins were full, the coop swept, and the axe I'd left leaning in the snow was tucked neatly beneath the awning blade, oiled and clean. There's a kind of silence that isn't empty. It listens. He wasn't like other boys I'd known. He didn't fidget, didn't explore. He moved through my world like a shadow that had learned not to cast itself too far. The first real thing he did that surprised me was the rope. I'd had a coil of frayed twine sitting by the barn door for weeks waiting for me to get around to tossing it. I hadn't mentioned it, hadn't touched it, but one day I found it knotted in mended wound clean around a peg, coiled like it was brand new. I ran my hand over the repairs tight and smooth. He'd done it. I didn't ask how I knew, I just did. That evening, I brought him a slice of cornbread and left it on the step of the storeroom. I didn't expect him to be inside, but he was, curled up on the cot I'd prepared the night before, his small frame tucked into the quilt like he was afraid to unfold himself. When I stepped in, he sat up quickly, feet already touching the floor, hands ready to move. I shook my head. "It's all right," I said softly. "I just brought supper." He nodded, reached for the bread with both hands like it was something sacred. And before I turned to leave, he looked up at me for the first time that whole day. It wasn't a long look, just a glance. But in it, I saw everything. Fear, yes, but also something quieter, something like readiness. Like maybe he was waiting for someone to prove that kindness wasn't a trick. I didn't press him for answers. I'd lived long enough to know that some stories come out backwards, or in pieces, or not at all. Sometimes the shape of a person's pain is better seen through what they mend than what they say. So I watched. I watched how he walked, always light, always quiet. I watched how he folded his blanket each morning, how he swept the floor without being asked, how he stood just to the left of the stove's heat, instead of directly in front of it, like he didn't want to take up too much space. And I watched how once he startled when I dropped a pan, not like a boy surprised, but like a soldier hearing a shot. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the empty teacup in front of me, the wick in the lamp burning low. And I thought about all the things I didn't know about him. His name, where he'd come from, who had taught him to keep his head down. But I also thought about the saddle blanket. Earlier that day, I'd gone into the barn to fetch the lantern. What I saw stopped me cold. He was sitting on a bale of hay, stitching the corner of my husband's old coat, the one I kept hanging by the door even though it was too torn to wear. His hands moved slowly, carefully, like he was fixing something delicate. And the thread he used wasn't even thread. It was a strip from the hem of his own shirt. I stood there hidden by the shadows and watched as he bent over the fabric like it was a ritual. His lips moved, maybe praying, maybe just whispering to the coat. I didn't interrupt. I didn't even breathe. I just stepped back and closed the barn door softly behind me. Sometimes you learn more from what people do when they think no one's looking than from anything they might say. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't felt in years. I wasn't alone in the house anymore. The silence had shifted. It wasn't empty now. It was shared. But it happened in the middle of the night. The wind had quieted for once, and the house had settled into that kind of stillness you only get when everything living is asleep or pretending to be. I woke to the sound of something soft, not a thud, not a crash, a breath, shaky, broken. Then another. I lit the oil lamp and walked barefoot across the cold floorboards. The hallway was dark, the kind of dark that feels like it's listening. I paused outside the storeroom, the place where he'd been sleeping for nearly a week now. The door wasn't latched. A thread of lamplight slipped under it. I knocked once quiet. "You all right?" No answer. Just a shuffle like someone gathering themselves too late. I opened the door gently. What I saw stopped me still. He was on the floor, knees pulled tight to his chest, back pressed against the far wall. The blanket I'd given him was crumpled in the corner like he'd tried to fight it off. His breath came in fast bursts, shallow and panicked. His eyes, they didn't see me. They were fixed on something long gone. I stepped in, careful not to startle him, but as the lamp shifted, I saw it. A scar, jagged and pale. It cut down his back like a bolt of lightning frozen into skin. Not fresh, but deep. He turned quickly when he noticed me, chest heaving. "I'm fine," he whispered. But I wasn't asking anymore. I just sat down slowly, leaving space between us. The way you do with a wild thing. Not to trap, just to share the air. For a while we sat like that. Him watching the floor, me watching the way his hands trembled. And then, as if the silence had finally stretched too long, he spoke. "My mother was Apache," he said. "My father was Mexican. They met when she was being pushed off her land. He worked on the railroads, came north. He didn't lift his head. They had nothing, but they tried. They built a shack near the woods, grew corn, sold hides, stayed quiet." He exhaled hard. "They got caught. Father was hanged for stealing a mule he never touched. Mother. They sent her south. I never saw her again." I didn't interrupt, didn't gasp, didn't offer pity, just listened. "I was sold," he continued, voice flat now, "to a rancher in Utah. White man said I could sleep in the barn if I cooked and cleaned. I was 12. He gestured faintly toward the scar. "That was the second time." My jaw clenched, but I said nothing. "There was a fire once," he said. "I pretended to be dead, rolled under the boards, let the smoke cover me. Walked 3 days, no shoes." He looked up at me then, not with tears, with stillness. "My name ain't Emmett," he said. "I don't remember my first one. Last person who called me anything kind died before I could answer." There was a long silence after that, the kind that fills a room like snowfall, heavy, quiet, undeniable. I didn't ask for more, didn't need it. I just stood and gently closed the door behind me. The next morning, I didn't boil oats like usual. I went out to the old shed near the corral. Hadn't opened it in years. Inside, beneath a tarp and thyme, were bundles of thick oak planks. I'd saved them once back when I thought I might build a cradle, for the child who never got one. I carried the wood piece by piece into the house. By noon, the hammer echoed across the valley. By sunset, a bed stood in the corner of the storeroom. Heavy, sturdy, sanded smooth. Not a cot, not a pile of hay, a real bed made by hands that meant to protect. That evening, he came inside and stood at the doorway, frozen. His eyes traced every corner, the quilt, the carved edges, the way the frame sat solid against the wall. "It won't break," I said, folding my arms. "Not ever." He didn't answer, not with words. He stepped forward, reached out and ran his fingers along the wood. Then slowly, carefully, he sat. He looked up at me, and for the first time since the day he arrived, I saw it. Not just caution, not just sorrow, but something softer. Trust. He reached for my hand, calloused to calloused, rough to rough, and I held it. Not like a mother, not like a stranger. Just as someone who knew what it was to carry ghosts. The snow kept falling that week. It buried the fences, froze the troughs, and turned the porch into a ledge of ice. But inside, something had started to warm. He didn't call me Mom. I never asked him to. But he said my name once, Eliza, softly, like tasting something for the first time. And after that, the silence between us felt less like a wall and more like a shared room. He still didn't speak much, but his hands did. He restacked the firewood with military precision, fixed the drafty window in the pantry without a word. And once, when I was coughing too hard to cook, I came to the table and found hot cornmeal grits already steaming in a tin bowl. Outside, the world had begun to whisper. At first, it was just glances. Men at the feed store tipping their hats with grins that didn't reach their eyes. Women who used to smile now turned away, lips thin, silence heavy. Even the clerk at the mercantile tossed the oats bag a little too hard, muttering under his breath. Can't believe what some folks keep in their homes these days. I said nothing, but my fingers curled tight around the counter. I didn't tell him, not then. But he knew. You can always feel when the wind shifts against you. He started staying closer to the barn, stopped coming with me to town, moved quieter than usual, which was saying something. And then one Tuesday near dusk it happened. I was mending a fence post near the creek when I saw the rider, dusty boots long, coat-battered hat pulled low. He dismounted like a man who thought every piece of land was already his, leaning against my water trough like he owned it. "Well, I'll be damned," he said, spitting to the side. "Thought I recognized that cabin." I straightened. "Don't think I invited company." He grinned wide. Yellow teeth, thin eyes. "She yours now, the quiet one with the dark eyes, I remember her." I didn't move. Used to work 3 counties over. Good hands for a while, till she ran off. He stepped closer, voice low. "We got papers on her, real ones. Ownership and all. She belongs to my employer. Or me, depending on how you look at it." He shrugged. "She probably spun you a sad story. They always do." I didn't blink. "She's not for sale." He smirked. "That ain't your choice." And in one swift motion, my fist met his jaw with a sound that cracked the cold air. His head snapped sideways, blood sprang across the trough. He dropped to his knees, coughing, groaning. I stepped forward. "She belongs here," I said, my voice low and even. "And you don't own enough land to bury your own damn body." He scrambled backward, hands slick with blood, face pale, mounted sloppy reins trembling. He didn't look back. 2 days later, a deputy rode up the hill, badge-polished eyes uncertain. "You know who he was?" he asked, tying off his horse. "I know what he tried. He's claiming assault, said you broke his nose." I folded my arms. "He threatened someone under my roof." The deputy scratched at his neck. "Word is, you're harboring someone without papers. A girl. No record, no name. Not your blood. Not legal." I didn't flinch. "She's not going anywhere." The deputy sighed. "Just don't give him another excuse." He didn't leave a warrant, but the warning hung in the air like a frost that never quite melts. That night, I told him, sat across from him at the kitchen table, coffee cold between us. There might be trouble. He didn't look up, just nodded. "There always was," he said. "You just didn't see it until now." The frost returned early. Windows crusted thick. The ground turned to iron. And I began to notice something that unsettled me more than any knock at the door. He was growing quiet again. Too quiet. No humming in the barn. No laughter when the fire popped too loud. He still chopped wood. Still fed the animals. But he moved like someone halfway packed. The way my husband once did weeks before the mine. Like a man who's already saying goodbye. And one morning I understood why. He stood by the doorcoat in his arms, eyes swollen but dry. "I need to leave," he said. I shook my head. "No, you don't. I can't have you lose this place. Not for me. They're watching. They'll find a way. You're not the reason." "You don't get to decide that," he whispered. I walked in barefoot. "People see me and they see a problem you didn't ask for." I stood slowly. "So what, you'll walk out again, freeze in a ditch? That's better. I'd rather be gone than be what ruins you." The silence after that cut deeper than any blade. But I didn't stop him. Not then. I just opened the old storage chest, packed what little I had, a loaf of cornbread, a tin of dried meat, a pouch of coins, and something I hadn't touched in years, a white handkerchief with faded blue forget-me-nots, sewn by a daughter I never held. I handed it to him, and he walked away. He left before the frost melted. Didn't say goodbye, didn't look back. I watched him from the porch, the hem of his coat flapping like a flag that never chose a country. His boots crunched over the frozen earth boots I made stitched from hide. I'd salted myself soles lined with wool and care. They fit him just right, but he walked like they were borrowed. I didn't stop him, not because I didn't want to, but because I understood. When someone's been owned, claimed, hurt in ways no child should know, freedom doesn't feel like staying. It feels like running without asking first. That night, the house made a different kind of silence. No cough from the barn, no squeak of the storeroom cot, just the groan of timber and the long, hollow cry of wind pushing through the shutters like it was looking for something. I didn't eat, didn't sleep. The next morning, the fire had gone cold, and beside the door where he used to leave his muddy socks sat the boots, still warm. That was the worst part, not the leaving, but the leaving behind. Winter took hold of the ranch like it meant to punish it. The horses grew thin, the hay ran low, and I moved through my days like a ghost who didn't know how to haunt. I told myself he was safer, told myself he'd find work down south, told myself he didn't need me. But the truth sat heavy in the corners of every room. He hadn't just left to protect me. He'd left because he believed he was still a burden. And I hadn't told him he wasn't. Weeks passed. The chores went undone longer than they should have. Fence posts leaned and stayed leaning. The stove cracked louder in the evenings. The stew got thinner. But I didn't fix any of it. Not until the knock. 3 of them, soft, familiar. I opened the door, heart beating wild, and there he was, windburned. Eyes rimmed red. His coat still the same one he'd arrived in that first night hung loose. His feet wrapped again in twine and linen. He didn't speak right away. Just looked at me like he was afraid the door would close again. I tried, he said finally. His voice cracked like a frozen branch. I found work in a kitchen 2 counties down. Slept behind the ovens. Got fed. I said nothing, just listened. But every night, I looked at the floor and wished it was this one. He swallowed hard. I tried to forget, to be nobody, but no one called me by my name like you did. His knees buckled a little and I reached for him without thinking. I don't know who I am, he whispered, voice trembling, but I know I'm nothing if I'm not here. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. I pulled him close, my arms around his shoulders, his forehead to my collarbone. He didn't sob, didn't shatter. He just breathed, like he hadn't been able to for weeks. I led him to the barn, not to hide him, but because that space had always been his. We sat on the hay together. I wrapped his feet in cloth, gave him broth with both hands. The horses stirred softly but didn't startle. Even they knew. That night when the fire was finally crackling again and his hands had stopped shaking, he said something I'll carry to my grave. I didn't want to bring pain to your door, he murmured, eyes on the floor. But walking away from you was the worst pain I ever felt. I knelt beside him, my fingers over his. You were never pain, I said. You were the proof I could still care. And in that moment, the ghost lifted just a little. Not gone, but quieter. The wind rattled the roof, but didn't come inside. And outside the window, the frost on the glass finally began to weep. Spring came late that year. The thaw didn't arrive like a song. It came slow and reluctant, like a wounded animal limping across the prairie. The frost lingered in the corners of windows, in the cracks between floorboards, in the parts of a heart that had learned too well how to freeze. But inside the house, something had changed. He was back. Not just in body, but in rhythm, in the way the floor creaked differently when he walked, in the quiet weight of his boots by the door. His laughter hadn't returned, not yet. But some mornings I'd catch him humming under his breath when he thought I was still asleep. It was enough. We fell back into routine, though now it felt more like a rhythm than survival. He helped me mend the south fence line, taught the mare to carry her weight without stumbling, learned how to boil water for coffee just the way I liked it, burnt at the edges, bitter and brave. Then one night the sky cracked open. It started just after sundown, the kind of wind that doesn't blow through you but slaps your memories loose. The smell of snow rolled in heavy, laced with iron and old pain. By midnight, the barn door slammed so hard it shook the cabin walls. I was halfway to my coat when he passed me at the door, already laced up and moving fast. She's laboring, he said. The mare. By the time I reached the barn, he was already on his knees in the straw arms, buried up to the elbows in warm tension. The mare groaned, sides heaving. Her breath came short and sharp, misting in the lantern light. She's straining wrong, he muttered. Let me, I started, but he shook his head firm. I've got her. Just hold the light. So I did. I held the lantern steady while he worked his fingers, calm but swift, whispering, Something low, not in English, not in anything I knew, just sound and memory and rhythm. And then with one final tug it happened. The foal slipped free, slick and trembling legs folding awkward beneath its tiny body. The mare collapsed with a soft grunt, her eyes wide but still. He cradled the foal, wiping it clean with his own coat sleeve, holding it close like it had always been his to protect. He leaned his forehead against the mare's side, eyes closed, hands shaking now that it was done. I didn't speak. I just watched him, a boy who used to flinch at loud noises, now coaxing life from pain, who once hid his hands but now offered them without hesitation. That was the moment I knew he wasn't just staying, he had come home. The next morning, light poured through the frost-covered glass like it had been waiting for permission. I opened the storeroom door to find the stove already lit, but what caught my eye wasn't the fire. It was what lay just beneath it. A pair of boots, small, handmade, real hide, wool-lined soles, the kind that took hours to stitch and even longer to earn. He stared at them for a long time as if afraid they'd vanish. Then slowly he knelt, running his hand along the seams. But he didn't put them on. Instead, he tucked them carefully beneath his cot, not to wear, not yet. Just to know they were his, that someone had made them not out of duty, but out of care. That night, the house settled into the kind of quiet that doesn't ask for anything. But near midnight, I stirred. Something pulled me awake, not noise, but a shift in the air. The kind of silence that feels heavy, like breath being held too long. I lit the lamp and walked to his door. The light beneath it was gone. But inside, I found him sitting on the floor, knees hugged to his chest, the blanket tossed aside. His shirt had slipped, and in the low flicker of light, the scar on his back shone like a map etched in ash. I didn't ask what he saw when he dreamed. I didn't ask if the scar still hurt. Some pain doesn't leave, it just waits for you to give it a name. He looked up, eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. I thought I was done, he whispered. Done running, done waking like this. You are, I said. He shook his head, not yet. And that's when I realized coming home doesn't end the war inside you. It just gives you a place to rest between battles. So I sat beside him, took his hand, and we waited for morning. Not because it would fix anything, but because we knew it would come. Spring didn't come with fanfare. No thunderclap, no songbird. It crept in softly like a whispered apology after a long silence. The frost melted one morning, almost shyly, peeling back the edges of the pasture. Beneath it, green, small, stubborn, alive. He was mending the gate when it happened. Just him and the dog, the quiet one, that never used to let anyone close. Now it followed him like a shadow. Later that day, we rode into town. I remember the dust still clung to our coats and the sun hadn't quite broken through the morning fog. We walked straight into the clerk's office. He glanced up from his desk and blinked. We're here to be married, I said. He didn't laugh, just nodded, opened the book and asked full name. There was a pause. Then the boy, my boy, looked at me. And I said Dennis Rowe. He nodded. That was the name now. Not borrowed, not given, chosen. They wrote it down in ink, sealed it with wax. The world could gossip all it wanted about the barefoot boy who arrived from the wind, about the woman who took him in. But ink holds its ground. We never had a church wedding. No vows recited beneath steeples. Just us, a field of wildflowers, a cottonwood tree leaning like it had watched too many lifetimes pass. He held my hands and said nothing. But his silence was full of promises of home of peace. That evening he asked, "You warm enough?" I leaned into him and smiled. "I'm home," I said. Sometimes the people who walk into your life quietly are the ones who carry back the parts of you that were lost. Not with noise, not with grand gestures, but with quiet loyalty, small kindnesses, and the courage to stay. Because healing doesn't always look like being strong. Sometimes it looks like being seen. If this story stirred something quiet in your heart, leave us a comment below. We'd love to hear about someone who once made you feel like you'd finally come home. And if you believe the wind always brings people back to where they truly belong, subscribe to Still Winds of the West. Here we tell the stories time can't carry away, only the heart remembers.